define that. It stands for Pakistan Tehreek-e-Insaf, but embedded there is the ideology. Basically, is in English it would be seen as movement for justice, and our core sort of components of the ideology are that we believe in having the justice being served at all levels, and obviously the concept of self-esteem as well, and humanity. So these are the building blocks for the ideology to be flourished. So that is what we mean by PTI, that it's a movement, and it's a movement which will reflect the aspirations of people of Pakistan. And Imran Khan being the chairman of the party for the last 15 years when it was started off. So that's what it is. I think there are two reasons. I think first is the political systems that have been in place in Pakistan for the last 60 and 61 years. And obviously the democratic values have never been applied. I mean, we all talk about democracy, but we've also failed to actually deliver to the expectations, because democracy has certain its components, that it needs to have the institutions as well, the working in tandem with each other. It also needs to have the society as a whole to actually reflect what they really want to do. But in the past, I mean, as we all know, that we've had at different times in place, we've had the military takeovers as well in Pakistan, starting with Ayub, and then Yahya, and then Zia, and then Musharraf. And obviously during those gaps, we've had the political activities, but that political activity has always been the politics of interest or the politics of conflict. So, but there has never been the politics of responsibility, which obviously in a democratic model, you will actually serve those requirements of the nation, basically, that people should be given a chance to actually freely exercise what they want to do and how they want to do that, and whether our political systems can actually deliver that. So in that respect, I think there was a gap, and the gap that was felt in 1990s, basically, that either it was the PPP or the PML Nawaz, the charges of corruption, the embezzlement, lack of governance, which kind of was pushed Pakistan in backwards rather than taking us to the forward. And obviously the change, the actual dynamics within the nation itself hasn't changed. We haven't grown. We have been basically borrowing heavily from World Banks and the IMFs. We've never really invested in our infrastructure. I mean, there's obviously a human capital. There is a lot of resources in Pakistan which could have been utilized for the betterment of the people of Pakistan. There are a lot of, basically within the manufacturing as well, we have literally basically not spent enough time and investment to actually get ourselves into the 21st century. Yes, in theory we are, but there is so much that needs to be done. So primarily there was a gap, and that gap was basically filled by, and when we started off as PTI in '96, that there needs to be a time in place where the people can actually, because the concept of justice, there was no sense of justice at all levels, neither at the social level, the economical level, or within the political systems. The political systems were primarily focused on, on nepotism. Well, this person has served some time with me in the prison, so I will actually award some senior positions to him. This person has been with me on the basis of loyalty. So there was never a correlation of skill set and experience and wisdom with the positions these guys were going for. So that in a reflect created that need, and that need is obviously basically now seems to have become the voice of the nation as well, that the youth and people like us are basically seeing that and saying, hang on a minute, how long can we actually carry on not realizing our own responsibility and leaving the country to the people who are probably not the best people to serve us? The whole concept of basically being the leaders and being in government is that they have to serve those responsibilities. But for them, this seems to have become an opportunity. So opportunity for blunders, opportunity for corruption, opportunity for basically all sorts of things. And at the end of the day, I mean, as a Pakistani and people in Pakistan and people outside Pakistan, I think the first thing that you see is that where is the dignity and credibility of Pakistan? Every day in any newspaper, if you pick up around the world, the name Pakistan would be mentioned, but for all the wrong reasons. So I think in a way it would give us a chance as well to present, not just to the people of Pakistan ourselves, but also to the rest of the world as well, that there are good people in there. There are people who can actually rise up to those challenges and they can do something about it. Yes, it will take time. We're going to go through this evolutionary process. It will take time, but at least let's get the direction right. Why can't we utilize our people? Why can't we actually utilize our resources? Why can't we bring transparency? I mean, the rest of the nations have done that. You've got the Koreans in front of you, the Taiwanese as well, Chinese. I mean, Japan after the Second World War, basically, I mean, they didn't have to research into anything. They took the research and they applied it. And they became the giants. So there is everything in Pakistan. We all hear the traditional, basically, well, we have everything. But how do we actually get the best out of those people? And I think the best thing is this, that you have to grab that opportunity which will actually give us those chances that, okay, now we have the right people. And I'm sure as long as they've tied in their responsibilities with the aspirations of the people, what they want to see, because they're sick and tired of it. Every day you hear in the news suicides as well, people burning themselves to death, people killing their daughters, people not have enough means. There is no gas, there is no electricity. And yet we find out that in Tharparkar, in Rikodek, and all over the place we have resources. So what is that thing that is holding us? Why can't people like Atar Rahman, Professor Munawar Basir, and all these people who are the experts in their own fields, why can't they actually bring something out of their intellectual capabilities and actually serve Pakistan? So I think it's for that reason PTI is basically very keen to actually mold the nation into that formation where people would take ownership as well, and they'll take great pride in serving the country, rather than basically having the country basically leaving it to its own devices. And then in the end, I mean, how many times we want to be bankrupted? How many times we have to go back to the IMFs and the World Bank? Why can't we actually work with the regional players as well? What's stopping us from working with Brazil, the BRIC initiatives, countries like Cuba, Turkey, Sri Lanka? Why do we always have to just rely on one partner? I mean, and these relationships, the wars, we have brought it upon ourselves. I mean, it's nothing to do with us. You know that in the last 10 years, the whole composition of the society has been changed. The actual psychological impact of just the war in Afghanistan and its basically the effect that has come into the tribal areas and the NWFP, it's been huge. I mean, the cost, our army is fighting with their own people as well. We cannot control that belt as well, and if we made the people against us, and then we asked the question to ourselves, what happened? I'm sure that there was the decades-long, basically, the neglect has actually turned the whole thing into a decadence. So I think, for our point of view, is this, that the time has come that we really need to move on. We cannot linger back in past. I mean, it's no point, basically, that we keep saying that how grand the 90s were or the 80s were, or we are a nuclear nation. We really need to move on, and the time has come for that. So that's why with any sort of movement, it takes its time. It really takes its time. You go through your inception stages, basically, where people will get together, they'll start thinking about it, and then its propagation as well. And obviously, for the last 15 years, there has been a constant struggle to get that message across. And it's one of those things that even if you go back in time as well, for any major revolution, for any major movement to take its effect, it takes time. So you have to gather people, you have to create the momentum, you have to keep hammering the same message that there is corruption, there is a lack of justice, there is actually breakdown within the institutions. It has taken time. I mean, the other reason could be that we were probably, I mean, in terms of the credibility of the chairman, Imran Khan, there was no doubt, but the people were questioning that whether he can assemble together the like-minded people, or he will have enough people, and the appeal to the youth. So I think there has been, even leading up to 30th of October and the 25th of December Jalsa in Karachi, and then before that in Lahore, there have been huge activities before that, but perhaps they were not covered the way they should have been covered, or perhaps the timing was not right. So finally everything kind of clicked together, and I think it's the circumstances as well. People have really had enough. The only option that is there now, that they see a huge, great hope that Imran Khan can actually deliver. If he has done all the other projects in his life, whether he was to do with cricket or the Shaukat Khanum or Namal, if he can do that, that should be seen as a litmus test that if he does get into the government, maybe he will deliver, because there is no need for him to do any corruption. He has seen everything by the grace of God, that whatever he's done, he's gone around the world. So I think, and if we can gather those people at all the levels, so perhaps there is a chance. And why not? I think everybody else has been given a chance. The military has had 4 chances. The major political parties have lots of chances. I mean, PML has had 5 chances. PPP has had a number of chances as well. And what do you get? We get the same, basically, talk on reconciliation. Well, he was wrong, we are right. Then they come, you are wrong, we were right. I mean, it's like, I mean, as I say, I mean, the Noura Kushti is going on, but we need to move on. We can't live in the past. So I think it depends how do you define war. I think there is definitely a war that is going on. It's an external aggression. I mean, Pakistan, unfortunately or fortunately, happens to be in that area, the place in that part of the world where even nothing is happening, there will still be a lot of noise. Historically, if you look at the British, if you go back in time, the Alexander the Great and all the other sort of conquerors as well, from Lodhis to Mughals and later on Sher Shah Suris, I think it's always been, that area has always interested people. The external civilizations, the countries. Now, with Afghanistan, it has been the same situation as well, that in the 80s, there was a war, then Americans left, a vacuum, then came the Talibanization, or the so-called Talibanization, then came a gap within the 10 years, and as a reaction, then there was a need for the 9/11, for the place. I mean, the Afghanis had to sort of be taught a lesson for actually keeping Osama bin Laden over there, and as a result of that, we got involved. Now, our involvement was basically, I mean, if that was the premise of thought that you're either with us or against us, I think we laid down ourselves so easily that we got into their war. It was their interest, and as a result of that, the whole composition changed. Pakistani army got involved. The whole society was basically going literally in all dimensions. And our war, to start off with, became their war. We have lost almost 35 to 36,000 people, and obviously then came the drones. At the end of the day, actually, what have we achieved?
But is there a war in Pakistan?
Obviously, there is a war in Pakistan. I mean, the people have obviously reacted. Some people have reacted through individually. Some people were used as a reaction in Pakistan for basically to justify their existence, that yes, there is an element, there are different types of Taliban Tehreeks are actually in place, and they utilize those people as well, that you've been bombed. I mean, what happened in Fatah, Waziristan, South and North. So from there, and the result of that was basically, it got carried in Pakistan, the rest of the Pakistan. I mean, look at Karachi, look at Lahore, look at the other cities in Pakistan. There was a destabilization. So the war, in the sense, yes, exists, that now the people of Pakistan are fighting 2 wars. First is to basically, is the army. They are people of Pakistan as well, so they're fighting. The second war, they're fighting against hunger, against corruption, against lack of governance. So yes, to answer your question, there is a war. And there are multiple wars going on, individual level and collectively. I think the first thing is this: in any other country, when if the democracy comes in, army as an institution, and one must respect that. If they have a particular requirements, they need as a fighting machine to protect the interests of Pakistan, they should have that. But army can never be part of this political decision making, none at all. Because the moment you start engaging with them at that level, we all know what happens. I mean, we all know what happened in 58, we all know what happened in 70s, we all know what happened in 80s, and we all know what happened in the last the decade. Army or any other institution, they should work within their own remit, and where there is a collective consensus and there is a need for that opinion to be formed. Yes, they work with the executive, they work with the different institutions, but they single-handedly cannot actually reflect or take charge that yes, we are the ones we know. Perhaps, I mean, traditionally, because that's perhaps is the only institution that have taken care of its own boundaries as such, and they felt the need that the politicians of Pakistan really bicker against each other, then they bring us in, and then we get the taste for power, and then we carry on in the name of democracy, whether it was Zia or anybody else, and we bring reforms as well. But the reforms don't happen. So I think the political party and the politicians and the leaders have to develop this culture that whatever happens, they must not actually go towards that path, because if you start doing that, there is going to be a trouble. So yes, army as an institution must be respected. Obviously, they are the citizens of Pakistan as well, but there has to be a boundary as well. You just cannot let them carry on that at one level, the Prime Minister of Pakistan is dealing with them at the same time to somebody else. I mean, for one cause, there are too many basically people going into that. So I think there has to be clarity. There has to be a clarity, there has to be a boundary, and army just as an institution will have to make sure that even they are getting to that stage as well, that they don't want to go into that mode of adventures, so to speak. So I think you see that as well, that they're holding back. But my sort of summary in question to that response is that as an institution, they should work, they should pull their resources, fight against the aggression, but their decisions cannot be made alone. It has to reflect the whole political system and the part and the leadership, whoever actually comes. I think there are two aspects to that. First, if there are any political issues between India and Pakistan, whether it's Kashmir and any others, they need to be resolved through dialogue, basically. There have been numerous UN resolutions as well for the people of Kashmir to have their sort of voice in there. So anything to do with that. At the same time, there has to be other dimensions as well. There has to be the concept of trade as well. I mean, not just India, but we got Bangladesh as well, Burma as well, Bhutan as well, and all the other countries as well. I think if historically speaking, that always in the past, it used to be the trade links or the trading sort of caravans that would take one civilization from one end to the other, whether it would start off from Baghdad and would end up in China. Similar way, I mean, that how do we define the concept of enemy? And if India is basically, and I think that has to be basically reflected from both sides as well. And it is very important that we actually ensure this, that where there is a sense of aggression or things like that, we actually have protective measures against it as well. But at the same time, if there is a trade that needs to take place, then why not? It should take place, because at the end of the day, you need a stable region. India should realize that as well. If there is no stability within that region, you can say goodbye to all the other dreams you carry as a nation, whether it's India or whether it's the issues of poverty. It's in India as well, and it's in Pakistan as well. The agriculture reforms and all the others as well. India perhaps is seen by the world through Bollywood and the IT, but India has huge problems as well, and India knows of that. So, and Pakistan has its own problems. So where there is a correlation that can be made, yes, why not? I mean, there should be the opportunity to trade, but the opportunity to trade should not be seen as a mechanism to start or incorporating destability for all the other reasons. So that has to stop. And obviously,
How will you stop that?
I think basically, it's going to be done in stages as well. That you cannot actually appear belligerent at every single instance. You cannot appear belligerent on every single thing. I think it's always that you have to resolve issues, whether they are regional or whether they're international, at the dialogue table. You cannot use aggression. And obviously aggression would lead to further destruction. Whether Pakistan does that or India does that, yes, if you are obviously, you are pushed against in such a situation where there's nothing else you can do, then obviously there are, then you would invoke those mechanisms. But you must try all the available opportunities as well. And you have to create those opportunities.
Can you give an example of that belligerence that you speak about?
I think belligerence in the sense that at times any single event that happens, for instance, related to terrorism, India has been very keen to actually be sort of said that, well, it's Pakistan. And then when they go through the investigations as well, sometimes you find out that it was actually their own people. For instance, that the train incidents that happened and the investigation came. So I think there has to be caution. There has to be some wisdom attached to that, that you cannot actually go into that mode where you are basically at that level, the two countries, two nuclear nations, and obviously Iran as well on the side, and then the China. You cannot engage in any of those experiments which could pretty much destabilize the whole region. First, get the harmony between the whole of you guys. I mean, you have SARC as well. I mean, SARC can bind these initiatives together. There are all other forums as well.
Can you give examples of Pakistani belligerence?
I think Pakistani belligerence, I guess, comes as a response to when they see either in the media or the people, or traditionally that India has been seen as an enemy, basically. I think first thing is basically that if PTI is in government, I think we really would put an end to all these incursions, all these groups working under the shadows for the betterment of the country. All these things have to stop. We really need to, and obviously this will come in stages as well. We're not going to basically...
So let's just say 5th May,
the incidents.
PTI was in power. How do you think the Prime Minister, whoever the PTI chooses, I'd imagine it'd be Imran Khan, but how would you feel that your party, as you've known it for the past decade and a half, how would it have reacted that day? Who would be the people being called? What sort of accountability would they have been done?
I think in relation to the Mumbai incidents.
No, to the Osama bin Laden arrest.
I think if Osama bin Laden, the first thing would have been that it's the role, if our intelligence agencies, they should know who's been coming into the country. I mean, for instance, if Osama was there, Army is saying we didn't know that, the government is saying we didn't know that, but the CIA knew that as well. So I think as any intelligence agency, whatever information they have, it needs to be passed on to the people who make the decisions. So that's the first thing, the right people at the right time for the right decisions. And obviously we cannot allow anybody, I mean, just to have somebody within the country and then you actually start compromising the sovereignty of the country, because when you know that the whole world is after him, first we don't even know whether it was him or not, because there are all sorts of news floating around. In fact, there are news about the Marines. They were saying, well, it was somebody else. And I mean, and that's, I'm not going to go into debate. But conceptually speaking, that we as the people of Pakistan, we need to first put our own house in order as well. We cannot entertain people from that somebody is from this place and somebody is this place and taking refuge in our place. I think we've gone past that, and we've all seen that, what happens. That if you just give them one wrong signal, if you create a situation, then the rest just basically carries on. And we've spent 10 years in this war, basically. They are looking for Osama, somebody else is looking for somebody else, and the war carries on. So I think as a matter of national security and importance, that any of these things, we will not basically allow that at all levels. I don't think it's the decision as such. I think there are a couple of things that really needs to be looked into. I think the first thing is this, that It's the fact that if there are people that are coming into PTI, then PTI has perhaps become their need to as well. Okay. And that need is obviously because they have been involved in the politics of their particular areas, and obviously they have certain responsibilities given to their electorates as well, and they probably see that the best way they can actually serve is now being part of PTI. Okay. Secondly, yes, there will be opportunists as well. At the same time, it happens. It happens in any country, in any part, in any political party. But that opportunism should be curtailed by strong and processes, that if there is an evidence or there's an evidence of allegation or there's an actual hardcore evidence that these people have had dealings in the past on that particular level, then perhaps these people should not be allowed. So what we are saying is that as a party, that everybody is welcome, okay? I'm sure there are certain thresholds as well that we cannot obviously go. But the people who are basically, when they will assume a particular position of responsibilities, then every single thing will be validated, whether their assets, whether their involvement at any level, whether there are any charges of corruption or any criminal, they will be going through. And obviously for that there is going to be, we have already sort of got the scrutiny committees as well. And obviously I think there is a need to readdress that balance as well, that is the ideology that needs to be protected and preserved. And for that, obviously, there has to be the balance between the people who have been involved with the party from day one and people who have recently joined. So there needs to be a balance for that as well. It happened way back in 70s as well. Bhutto was doing the same thing as well in late 70s. So we need to do that. But at the same time, when these people are coming, no longer they will be PMLQs or anybody else, they will become PTI. And they will have to deliver. They have to adopt that ideology. They will not be able to run with their own agendas. And if they do that, then obviously there will be pressure within the party as well. And that pressure will be created through the infrastructure as well, through the policies and processes within the party. Internally, we have to be so strong that we can actually take care of all these challenges as well. And yes, some of the things we actually had to, because there are a lot of things that are happening at such a fast rate. People like Qureshi have joined, then Hashmi has joined as well, Javed Hashmi Sahab, and then so many other people as well. Now, at the end of the day, it's the party that needs to determine that what do we need to do with this. There are personalities, fine, but it's the ideology and what exactly do we really want to achieve. And I think secondly, we're going through this evolutionary stage. You cannot actually at level one, obviously youth is there, youth will have its presentation as well. We have people like Faisal Javed, you have people like Andalib Abbas, you have people like Suleiman Malik, and all these guys at different positions, they are actually doing a brilliant job. But at the same time, you're having these old people as well. But again, there will be checks and balances. Of course there will be. Otherwise, I mean, the criticism will perhaps remain, but we'll take care of that, of course. I would say it's less of as an allegation, more of a misconception. Okay. To be honest with you, that the incidents you're perhaps referring to is probably Shah Mahmood Qureshi and him being the vice chairman. I think there has been a debate. There has been a debate within the our CEC, which is Central Executive Committee, which is obviously have people like Dr. Arif Alvi, Shiri Mazari, and all the rest. People who've been with the party for a long time. People like Hassan Rashid, Naimul Haq Sab. And so basically the idea was that to actually create that impact and to actually sustain that momentum. And for that, obviously, they felt that perhaps Shah Mahmood Qureshi was perhaps the best person to be in that position as the vice chairman. But there is no stopping. I mean, for instance, he may not be a vice chairman tomorrow or in 6 months' time because things will change. I mean, we are going through this evolutionary stage that there were nobody. For instance, we had the old information secretary was Umar Chima and Sarfraz Chima Sahab. But then Shafqat Mahmood came along and he perhaps presented a better sort of skill set and the rest as well. So he has assumed the responsibility. I think we as in PTI should realize the fact as well that yes, there is obviously there's going to be a lot of criticism, there's going to be a lot of misconception being created in the media as well and by the other parties, and that's fine, it happens. But internally we have to be strong as well that to actually dispel all these myths as well, at the same time provide that evidence that will actually dictate or determine that the next course of our actions, that actually it's not what it seems. I mean, for instance, that in UK, I mean, the party has grown a lot, and there are actually elections taking place. I mean, they are like...
Why aren't the elections taking place in Pakistan?
And in Pakistan, the elections are going to be taking place within the party as well. Of course, I mean, we've already had, for instance, USA is our main chapter as well. The elections have taken place there. We have in Pakistan as well. There is going to be a meeting tomorrow or the day after, very soon, where these things will be discussed. Again, in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa as well, in Punjab as well. I think it's just lots of things have taken at such a short amount of time. But we as a party are reacting to those needs. We have to introduce the concept of fairness, democracy, and its principles. First, we need to apply on ourselves. Because if we become the proponents and the ingredients of change, that needs to be reflected within the party. PTI members, PTI cadre, PTI backbone, the activists, their recommendations, their concerns, their suggestions always have to be listened by all the tiers of the leadership. Because if you forget that backbone, then obviously there will be a problem. But we can't afford that. We will not actually neglect those needs. And in fact, to be honest with you, now the focus of the party is, because they have created that momentum, they have sustained that as well. Now the focus of the party is actually the structure. And PTI, in sort of, I always say that PTI is, P is for processes. You have to have strong processes. T is for teams, and I is infrastructure. So if you get these three components right and synchronized, then the chances of opportunists or the chances of anything else creeping into the party would be minimized. Obviously, you can't remove that 100%, but it would be minimized. So you get those three layers right, then obviously the next at the policies levels you need to start reflecting, because we only currently we're talking about the operational requirements of the party, but not the policies, the intellectual requirements. And that requirements will, once you start presenting that as well, then obviously the confidence will grow. The sense of basically togetherness and the actual impact will travel further. And obviously there are people, I mean, we have think tanks basically, there are people like working all around the globe, I mean, and I can, I'm sure, expand further on that if there is a question. I think if the dynamics change, if there is a coup or anything, that we will follow the same principles and mode, to be honest with you. We have never said that, yes, we have often said that the need for a midterm election, and that's natural, that's a democratic process for the opposition to ask that. But we've also already always highlighted and stressed upon as well that if they keep getting the policies right, they should serve the whole time. There has to be, because otherwise you cannot actually kick out governments, you cannot kick out political parties in the parliament, and then you make them martyrs. So I think it's about time that if there is any government that comes into existence, they should serve their time. Then people should know what they've done objectively, what areas of their lives have actually been turned right, whether there has been a further degradance in their lifestyles in terms of education, it's the whole sense of peace and security, the businesses, it's very important. So I think to answer your question, that if as anything non-democratic, we will definitely not anticipate in going with that, so yes. I think Amr is, I think initially, yes, it was more urbanized, naturally, because you needed people from the middle class as well, whether they're engineers, doctors, or even businessmen as well. But as time goes on, I think the whole idea is this, that there are two different dynamics, that in order to penetrate into urbanized areas, you have to have a completely different approach. And for rural areas, you have to have a completely different approach, because rural areas have never been exposed to, first, to the level of that awareness where they can actually take those decisions upon themselves. Secondly, they have been tied in the political context that as long as their needs, when there are like Thana Kachari and these things like that, as long as these are being served by the people they elect or they subject themselves to, then that's fine. So those dynamics have to change. And obviously, I think what's happened is that whether you look at in Faisalabad, Jhelum, Multan, and all the other sort of urban areas, and even in Karachi as well, you will start seeing the same impact, Peshawar, that naturally people sort of, there is a shift that people go towards cities. I mean, normal day sort of travelers as well for the businesses, for their normal routines, and then come back to the villages. So what's happening is this, and we have actually noticed that, and I'll go even further as well, that those experiences of actually being in the urbanized areas and actually being exposed to these patterns, these thoughts, and this activity, political activity, they're taking it back. They're taking it back to the rural areas, they're taking it back to the villages. In fact, I was in, just last year in March, I was in remote areas. Basically, I was in places like Charsada, Nashera, initially just to see the impact of the flood and that has taken place over there and what activities are taking place to make it better. And I was amazed to see that it was like remote village, and this is ready, and there was a PTI flag, and the guy was just going there and happily basically. So it was an evidence that at least people have started to see that there is a political party and they are going to do something about it. Now, obviously, the emphasis on us within the party in itself, that how do we actually make that happen? Can we simply rely on the media? Can we rely on, because in the rural areas people might not be watching Airwise or the Geos and all the rest, maybe, or can we just rely on PTV? But at the same time, you need to, and what we have started doing is that in one dimension that we have started doing the welfare projects. For instance, recently in Bedin when the flood was there, so PTI has a wing as well. There are a lot of PTI people who are actually working on those welfare projects. So that kind of expose the populations of those rural areas to these people that actually they are doing something about it. Secondly, when the flood came in 2010, the IKEA Foundation, so they did a lot of work as well in remote areas. So I think that further actually took the words as well. Because the idea is this, you have to take the word that something is going to change. This is how we need to do that. And at the same time, I think the rural areas are kind of tied in with the brotherly system as well, or the caste system. And what's happening is this, that I think initially we would get the criticism that, well, everybody gets the criticism, I think as a whole, as a concept, that how can you change the society when there's everybody votes on brotherly system, everybody votes on associations, everybody votes on whether it's, even in Punjab, you have Jats and you have Rajputs and you have Maliks and you have Rains and all. How do you break into that kind of mode? But what we have actually, and that's an experience from my side as well, what we noticed, that you actually didn't have to do anything about it. Because what was happening is that if you're taking the message to the urbanized areas, and urban areas have people representing the rural areas as well, or the middle class or the elite class, the pattern started to emerge that the people, I mean, for instance, if somebody's father belongs to or affiliated with PMLN or PPP, if I were to go to them as a stranger, they perhaps would not entertain me. But if their sons and grandsons would go back to them, obviously their mind started to change, that yes, you have to open up. They started to see a new alternative. There has been numerous cases. For instance, I remember getting a call from somebody in Gujarkhan, a PP person, and he said, well, the floods, I don't want to pay into any of the Prime Minister funds or anything like that. I want to pay into IK flood relief. So that was an indication that things are changing. And then suddenly, and obviously some of the patterns were not visible. Obviously they were visible to the people on the ground, but perhaps could not actually expound it in the manner that should have taken place. For instance, in our communication, for instance, in the media, for instance, at all different layers of communications that take place. Of course, the members perhaps knew that, but the public didn't. So there's our responsibility as PTI members, as Pakistanis, to actually highlight those issues, that these things are taking place. People are actually started to see that difference noticeably. People, obviously, their expectations have to be managed as well, that you do not give them a false sense of security and hope. It has to be realistic as well, how it's going to take place. And I think within the party, the emphasis has always been that now it's started to change, that when we actually communicate, how do we communicate? Do we create misconceptions with our own communication, or do we actually provide clarity? If we can provide clarity, how is it going to be interpreted? Can we have an independent, neutral, observers as well, when they offer their opinion, can we actually see as a belligerent attack on us, or do we see that there is something actually right in their logic as well? And can we turn that around? Can we actually focus on our strengths, but can we also actually minimize our weaknesses as well? So there is basically that balance is, and that debate has started to take place, that if somebody actually, for instance, comes up with, let's say that somebody says that I'm a skeptic, okay? Now, what does this mean? I mean, do you take that statement as an attack on you, that somebody says, well, PTI, who are they? I'm a skeptic. What do you guys have done? I think it has to be taken first. You need to take the emotive element out of it, the subjectivity. Then you focus on the objective piece of that, and then you start going into the next routines, that perhaps that person has never been given the visibility. If the visibility existed, perhaps the modes of its communication were not the appropriate ones. Perhaps, for instance, a person in rural areas would have its different means to assess that information as being opposed to the one in the cities. Okay, if you have done that, did you actually, if the people's views were changed, for instance, if a person who gets induced into PTI based on our ideology and Imran Khan's chairman's speech and all the rest, once you have done that, can that engagement be taken on the further level? You cannot just leave that person on its own, because if you do that, the person will be thinking, okay, what do I do next? Where is the guidance? Where is the direction? I want to contribute more. Just being labeled as a PTI member, is it enough, or do I need to be part of those initiatives, whether in my local areas, in terms of grassroots penetration, whether initiatives which are of intellectual nature, whether they're initiatives like of welfare projects, for instance. I mean, there's always these questions that kind of, I think it's the approach. And that is obviously where the psychological aspects of political training kicks into action, that we need to go through that. I mean, leadership is not just basically that, well, we have a vision, but it also needs to understand and assess that how another person would think about you and feel about you when they say they're a skeptic or they are critics of you.
The decision has already been made by the youth of Pakistan. It's what's called the tipping point. It is the point where now politics will change in Pakistan. It's already changing.
The first problem is Pakistan really needs to have the right people at the right place. It's the leadership crisis. And within the leadership crisis, it carries the governance as well, the institutions as well, the differentiation, and how do we bring transparency within the institutions. So all these things. Secondly, the policies, the right policies, which impacts whether it's education, whether it's infrastructure development, whether it's health, how do we need to bring health? So those policies will take care of that. And thirdly, I think we have to start taking ownership of our own people as well. And that means the sense of justice and its application, their dreams and aspirations tied into, we have to remove these creeds and caste systems and all the rest. Everybody's equal, whether they're minorities, whether somebody's a Muslim, Christian, Hindu, Sikh, they should all be appreciated and honored, and they'll be given those things which they've always aspired to, and that will be given through the welfare state. So these are the three things. If there is a right leadership, you will get the right policies. With the right policies, you will see its implementation. And that implementation will create that components of the welfare state where if somebody is hungry, they will go back to the state. If somebody seek medical attention, they can do that. If they need lawyers as well. So these are the things. If you get that right, naturally the whole system in the country will be put onto the right direction, and naturally will change. I mean, to be honest with you, Amr, just imagine, where do we want to see ourselves in 2047? Do we need to see ourselves as the countries who've been embroiled in conflicts and interests and individualities and personalities, or do we see that ourselves, that finally the Pakistan can actually shine, and Pakistan will shine? Pakistan has all the intellectual people, Pakistan has all the resources as well. I think it's the combination. How do you cannot, infrastructure development is the key. You cannot just rely on single projects. I mean, if previous governments have done something right, if they initiated a policy or projects, the next government should not actually basically put them in the bin just because of the fact they were your opponents. You need to sustain that and you need to carry it forward. You need to involve people at all levels. And I think for that is PTIs is basically, I think it's all about that we have to start taking ownership of our own people, and we also have to present the right picture around the world as well. We should not be seen as radicalized, we should be seen as people who can actually hold a conversation, who can actually present an opinion to the Western media, who can actually present intellectuals. I mean, why do we quote people like Chomsky's and people like Robert Fisks and Jason Burks? Why can't we start quoting our own people? What's wrong in quoting Ashfaq Ahmed? It's all Allama Iqbal and all the other people, Faz and all the other educationalists, scientists. I mean, why are we doing MBAs? Everybody you speak to, what have you done? I'm doing MBA. We need mathematicians. Because if you don't have mathematicians, you would not have scientists. So you need all these corridors of technology and science to be opened up, and you can do that. We need to have investment in social sciences. Well, we need writers. I mean, the writers who can present Pakistan at the highest level. We can't just have basically that on an emotive level, you're writing the same rhetoric day in, day out, and nobody knows in the West that what are they doing about it. So I think these are the things. Produce intellectuals, scientists, mathematicians, business opportunities, and business opportunities which can tie into with research as well and development with the industries and universities. I mean, our universities basically, nothing is happening. So I think it's the message of hope basically, but the important aspect is delivery. You have to deliver. It cannot be just words, and it has to be evidence-based politics, not the rhetoric.